In our sample, I'll click the Execute Reader button to demonstrate a simple example using the data reader object. Now we'll look at this in more detail later on, but for this first example, all we need to do is retrieve a little bit of data to show how it works. We'll start by creating our connection object just like before and a command object. This time our command object uses a select statement to retrieve its data. Select customer ID and contact name fields from our database, from customers, where the country equals USA. So we'll have a small subset of the columns and the rows in the customers table. Before we can retrieve our data, we need to open the connection. And I'm going to use a string writer object in which to store my results. A string writer is one of my favorite little ways to get data out of things, put them into a buffer, and then retrieve the text later on. It's a technique I use all the time. So here we'll create a new string writer and then write into that buffer. We're ready to go. Using our reader object. So here a using block allows us to automatically dispose of our data reader when we're done with it. And we'll assign into the reader the results of calling our command object's ExecuteReader method. The ExecuteReader method hands back a data reader poised and ready to return data. The design pattern here is pretty common in .NET. It's called the reader design pattern, and the concept is you have a forward-only, read-only access to some set of data. Here we have a while loop. So the read method returns a Boolean value, true or false, indicating whether it successfully read a row. Before we get here the first time, the reader is positioned before the first row of data. Once we call the read method, it's positioned on the first row of data, if it got to the first row, and returns true. If there wasn't a first row of data, if it was empty, for example, it'll return false and we'll just never go inside the loop. Well, in this case, we do have a first row of data. It returns true, we go into our loop, and in this case, we need to retrieve data. There are a number of different ways you can retrieve data from a data reader, and we'll examine those later on. For now, we'll use a simple one. We'll use the name of the column to index into a collection of fields. Here, customer ID and contact name are the names of columns. We'll retrieve those from the reader, using them as indexes, and we'll format the output using this template here. We'll replace this placeholder with the customer ID value, then a colon, and replace this placeholder with the contact name as a placeholder, and then we'll write the results into our output string writer. We'll repeat that for each row we retrieve from the reader. Notice we can't go backwards, we're only going forwards, and we can't modify the data here either. When we're done, we'll take the results in our string writer and call its toString method to retrieve it as a string. Let me press F5 to run full speed, and you'll see the results. We've iterated through the data from front to back, and for each row have retrieved some values from that row of data. Now, I can't say you'll really use the data reader in this way, that is, just to retrieve the data and display it on the screen. But it is one possibility for this object. The part you need to remember is how you iterate through the rows and how you retrieve the data from that row of data.